I am Edwige Germain. I am a teacher researcher in art at the Institut National Polytechnique Printemps in Toulouse and engineering school in life science and agronomy. I am interested in the different forms of perception of human beings and non-human living.
Hello, my name is Fred Garcia and I am a researcher in Toulouse at INRA, the French National Research Institute in Agriculture, Food and the Environment. My research domain is artificial intelligence and modeling, applied to the study of plant behavior and more specifically to the study of sound perceptions in plants.
Hi, my name is Thijs. I'm an independent researcher and interdisciplinary artist living and working in Amsterdam, the Netherlands. And my work probes the intersections between art, science, and technology.
Hello, bonjour. My name is Sofiane Audry. I'm an artist, researcher, professor at the School of Media of Université du Québec à Montréal, and my research creation work is at the intersection of artificial intelligence and new media art. So in this paper, we present 3 experiments that stage non-human sentience within substrates where they're not usually expected, such as microalgaes, plants, artificial neural networks, and electromechanical reactions. In the art science project Qui parle donc, you have plants that are surrounded by electronic microscopes and cameras and that respond to natural sounds and human breathing. In the Xenolalia project, microorganisms are interacting with artificial neural nets to generate some kind of a new alien language. These works resonate with cybernetician Gordon Pask's experiment of the late 1950s, where an electrochemical substrate was reacting to sound and would provoke the emergence of artificial sensory organs. Pask's starting question was, would it be possible to build a device that would be able to modify its own perceptual categories and develop its own ways of influencing the world? And to answer this question, he built electromechanical devices that could find their own evaluative criteria to discriminate relevant information from their environment. By applying electric current through electrode arrays, the system could control and develop the growth of sensory structures. The properties of these systems were surprisingly similar to the behavior of neural cells. And Pask thus created an artificial system that would self-organize to distinguish between 2 different sound frequencies and building a system that could build its own sensory apparatus.
Qui parle donc is an art science installation divided into a scientific part, focusing on showing current research on plant sound perception, and an artistic part where the viewer is able to somehow view the world from the plant's perspective. The installation, Qui parle donc, intends to reveal alternative ways of thinking about vegetal life through the illustration of ongoing research on sound perception in plants. Plants have long been objectified, considered as inert and decorative living things. It is only recently and cautiously that researchers have become interested in the perceptive and cognitive capacities of plants. Qui parle donc presents in front of the general public state-of-the-art as well as in-progress scientific research in plant behavior and intelligence. The installation is divided into 2 parts, shown in 2 separate rooms. One directly presents scientific experiments, while the other stages plants as part of an artistic part. The first room presents an aesthetization of 2 experiments showing the sensitivity of plants to sound phenomena. The first experiment explores the ability of the roots of Arabidopsis thaliana, a type of cress, to orient itself towards a water sound. The second experiment illustrates the richness of electrical signals traveling through the Nicotiana benthamiana plant, a type of tobacco, subject to air drought and sounds. Visitors are invited to blow on a microphone and their breath are then converted into sounds and fans. The electrical reaction of the plant is then displayed on a screen.
After passing through an in-between space and Faraday airlock, the visitor enters the second room. A screen displays different pieces of his body filmed on camera, questioning the perception of different time of the plant and its ability to perceive everything at the same time in the absence of dedicated organs. The airlock leads the visitor to a world where he himself now becomes an alien, the world of the plants. In this space, the complexity and difference of perception related to this organism and presented through three different states, with naturalistic sounds from birds, bees, winds, but also noisy sounds, and where all monitors broadcast the images of the spectator who is being observed and placed under surveillance. Three bins are visible in this artistic space. They contain camera and screen tracking the eyes of the spectators, a robot microscope that scans the plant on a micro scale, and a chronophotography device with pictures taken every 5 minutes. What does mean for plants? What does a sound mean for a plant? What we hear does not have the same meaning for the plant than for us in this place, the intention was to show that each organism will seek signs in reality according to its organic capacity, and that it interprets according to its needs, the two being intimately intertwined.
What is the relationship between sensing and imaging? How do symbols emerge with the different cells, brains and societies? Are symbols and languages alive? With the Art Science installation project Xenolalia, we approach these questions through the interactions of three kinds of entities who collaborate to create new symbolic shapes: an artificial neural network, a colony of microalgae, and the microscopic presence of human observers who project their own meaning upon the work. The work invites the spectator into an environment that explores the evolution of both biological and computational forms of adaptive processes through visual magnification. The installation, as a mesoscopic observatory, enacts the symbiotic relationship that progressively and unpredictably unfolds between the organic and the digital, the biological and the artificial systems. Both biological and artificial forms of life interact with one another symbiotically and to generate new glyphs, sort of a living alphabet. The open-endedness of the system allows the audience to imagine future forms of interactions between artificial, carbon-based and even extraterrestrial entities, which could potentially emerge in the future. The generative process is accomplished by staging an image-based feedback loop between a deep learning neural network known as an autoencoder and a colony of microorganisms known as Euglena gracilis, who have light-reacting properties that allows them to be used as a living photographic substrate. In Xenolalia, a feedback loop is introduced between the autoencoder and the Euglena colony. At each step, the autoencoder perceives the shape formed by the euglenas on the petri dish and generates an image in response, which is projected back onto the petri dish. Within minutes, the euglenas roughly assemble around the shape of light, creating their own imprint on the petri dish surface, which appears as a dense green form. This image is then photographed by a camera and sent back to the inputs of the autoencoder. The process is repeated until convergence to a new glyph that is the result of a cycle of interaction between the computational and biological entities. While the decisions of the neural network are predetermined, the Euglena colony is somewhat unpredictable, affected by various variables of the environment where they live, such as ambient light, temperature, nutrients, oxygen, etc. The integration of both systems as part of a single sensorial and generative process is therefore indeterminate and emergent.
Modern conceptions of cognition, language, and intelligence are heavily impacted by the development of computing and, in particular, of artificial intelligence. Cognitive sciences and artificial intelligence have long been dominated by a dualistic worldview that considers intelligence to be a disembodied process, rather than as a physical phenomenon. This view holds that cognition is equivalent to computation, that brains are just the physical substrate, hardware, that runs cognitive processes, software, and that in theory, human intelligence could be therefore programmed on a computer. This dualistic view has been overcome with the enactivist theory, which posits that there is no internal processing of external data at the cognitive level. Yet, the dualist and representationalist worldview of cognition has impacted the development of research on the intelligence of animals and insects, and more recently of plants. In the spirit of this approach, our works ask for radically rethinking our conception of plants, animals, and intelligence.
Philosopher Henri Bergson represents one way to re-examine these ideas. In his book Creative Evolution, he explains that human beings have created a way of perceiving in a material with solid properties. Human perception, he argues, and more particularly intelligence necessitates the movement of the body, which must act and create identifiable perceptual units. Perception first slices, fakes, rigid states called instant T out of the unorganized informality of time. It is therefore from this need for stable state that our perceptual world becomes organized. However, human beings do not stop at creating such moments, such virtual stops from the moving and unorganized. They constantly project their perceptual structures to create their own presence and grasp the stable from the unstable. This leads Bergson to critique causality, linear temporality, and logic, which for him constitute arbitrary and artificial construction of temporality. He criticizes our inability to understand the living and the living time, which is unpredictable and indeterminate, not corresponding to our mechanism of perception which constantly seeks and projects the known to counter the unknown.
Bergson's philosophy of perception challenges classical input-output worldviews promoted by artificial intelligence, and instead highlights the highly creative nature of sentience through the invention of categories. Thinking of the intelligence of sensitivity of plants not only requires inventing conceptual categories other than our own, time, space, mortality, sensoriality, but also to move away to anthropomorphism and anthropocentrism, since any analogy with humans is inherently misleading for such non-human organisms. The artistic projects described here attempt to give other forms of representation and to better understand the intrinsic particularities of vegetality.
The projects presented in this paper suggest that perception is an open-ended process, and that sensing is not exceptionally human. How can we understand otherness in its absolute and exclusive difference? To seek the other is to assume our own presence in any understanding of the world, and that what we perceive is imbued with being human. According to composer Yanis Xenakis, art and science can both access forms of objective knowledge through the processes of inference and experimentation. But art can go beyond these, attaining forms of subjective knowledge through what Xenakis calls revelation, giving us access to the emotional, personal, universal dimensions of reality. This concept of revelation is reminiscent of philosopher Henri Bergson's theory of perception and the enactivist theories of cognition, which state that perception is fundamentally creative.
Hi there.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Hi, I'm really sorry. I just jumped in. I just came in. Yeah. So all of your presentations are just done. Sorry, I got very little of the last ones. But I think we can start off with like maybe a few questions, and then see what the audience members would have for them. And the first one that comes into my head is I figure most of your presentations were recorded maybe pre-pandemic or post-pandemic.
In the pandemic.
During the pandemic. Okay, so they're pandemic videos. Pandemic. That's super interesting. And the first question's a question for like each of you, and it's about how you relate with that work in contrast with like past other works. In the context of this pandemic, like how do you feel, the concepts that you've explored and like the work that you started teasing out, like how has that been informed by our current collective conditions of existence?
If I may, very briefly, actually, I said that they were filmed during the pandemic. It's not exactly true. I think it's true of the work so there's two works that are, well, three works actually that's been presented in this paper. So by the way, it's a collective paper that we've all written together. Myself, Sofiane Audry, Edwige Armand, and Fred, who are here with us today, and Tess Maurizio Martinucci, who is away, might join us at some point. And it talks about those three works. One from Gordon Pass, the famous cybernetician, who obviously worked before the pandemic or in between pandemics, I guess. And the work of Edwige and Fred has been shown and created before the pandemic, but I think we have the chance today that they are actually in the exhibition of the work. So maybe we can have a chance to look at it more closely. And as for me and Tess, this is the work Xenolalia. This is a work that's in progress, but we had started it before the pandemic. And I think that for all of us, it's of course the pandemic kind of maybe revealed how to the point our projects were. And of course these are open-ended projects. They're to me, the point is really that they open up, ideas and space for discussion. So I'll let my fellow presenters also maybe intervene.
Ok, je peux le dire en français.
I hope the audience members don't mind. I'm pretty sure not all of us.
I can translate if you want.
For sure.
I can try my best.
Wonderful, that's a great idea.
The only link with the pandemic is l'imprédictibilité du vivant, en fait. Là, on a vraiment été confronté au fait qu'on peut pas le contrôler. On a beau mesurer, prévoir, modéliser le monde sous la coupe de la logique humaine, planifier au maximum le temps, mais en fait, on se rend compte que là, on se retrouve dans une situation qui nous met en échec.
Yeah, so we even if we as human beings we try to predict the world with all of the technologies and knowledge that we have, this pandemic just makes us realize how unpredictable living systems are, and it is what is kind of putting us in a situation of failure. That's a failure of human systems in a way, because we think that we can predict things, but actually we can't. So I completely agree with that. I think that and I think that part of this big point we're trying to make with this paper was about that, and about the very creative nature of perception. So there's this. I think this pandemic shows the creativity of life in a way. I don't know, because we're. And I mean, I'm thinking about these plants, and I'm thinking about this. I was looking again at this Uglina colony. By the way, I have some of them here in the back that are still kind of cooking. But I mean, like, this is it for me. Like, the big thing about this pandemic was to realize that we're just part of this big soup of DNA, right? We're still in it, you know. And in that soup, sometimes there's things that just happen, and not always good for the integrity of organisms, but that's the reality that we're in. So
fantastic. I've got so many questions coming up. So this is immensely interesting. You know, I realized, by the way, I haven't introduced myself at all. My name is Sarah. I'm Sarah Shuka, and I'm currently adjunct faculty. I teach at York University. It's Glendon campus. It's the bilingual campus at York. I have a PhD from Université de Montréal, and in communications, out of all things. So that gives me a segue into the next question, which is about cybernetics and control. And this idea, as you've all said, the uncontrollability, the indeterminacy of life is like it's kind of mirrored in a sense in like technological systems, right? Like we have technological failures, we've got like human systems failures. Like, do you find the cybernetics aspects of things and this, like, just generally this like sort of idea that technology should be easy to use, should be controllable, that everything like should be in our hands, that's sort of like at the core of, you know, what a little bit at the core of what cybernetics is. Like, how do you find are these concepts still useful, or is it more about experimenting with them and sort of like testing them out, kind of like in the laboratory for you? I guess my question is like those concepts that are failing us now, right? Have you looked at them, or have you looked up at them as guides, or as more in terms of a critical attitude that you would?
Maybe what I can say is that that's true that in our different experiments, for instance with Qui parle donc, we wanted to show the special relation that exists between human and non-human beings, and we wanted to show that in fact in general in our life, I think we generally we forgot that there is a true struggle for life in the idea that in the fact that we humans need to try to control, to simplify, to always reduce the complexity of life in order to control it, and
with this experiment with qui parle donc, we wanted to show that in fact plants are more complex than people think, and maybe they communicate with us, maybe they communicate between them. We don't know, and plants are not crops. Okay, it's not only a question of agriculture and feeding people. They are really very complex beings. And yes, maybe with this kind of experiment, maybe people will consider differently plants or the non-human beings, and they will understand that it's very, very, very difficult to control them. If you want to control life, you need a lot of technology. You need to simplify life. You need to modify with genetically modified organisms, for instance, or what you want. You need to constrain a lot life and living beings if you want to control them. And with this kind of experiments we made with Paladon, the idea was to show that in fact it's very difficult, that it's not so simple, and maybe we need not to forget that.
Je peux ajouter quelque chose pour un peu appuyer ce que dit Frédéric par rapport à cette autre forme du vivant, c'est que la majorité des personnes en fait tombent vite dans la volonté de parler du vivant avec des représentations humaines, c'est-à-dire qu'il y a une incapacité à accepter que le vivant n'est pas compréhensible que par le point de vue humain. Et c'est vraiment un peu l'idée de l'exposition, on vous fera visiter, mais parce qu'en fait, ça rassure pas de pas avoir quelque chose qui nous ressemble. On veut vraiment assimiler le reste du monde à l'homme. Et en plus, on n'est que dans un monde humain. Et par rapport aux technologies...
I'll just translate, if that's okay, before you continue. I'll try. Just Edwige was saying that to add to what Fred just said, that one of the things that they wanted to show is that humans always try to make things intelligible for them. And in so doing, I guess it misses part of what is actually happening, because nature is not intelligible, at least definitely not entirely. So in this project, this exhibition, it's one thing that they wanted to show. I guess Edwige, c'est comme dans votre expo, c'est plutôt que d'expliquer, c'est pas didactique, c'est pas que vous essayez d'expliquer, mais plutôt finalement de montrer cette espèce de complexité.
Oui, de la complexité et de l'inconnaissable.
Là, the unintelligible, the unknowledgeable. Yeah, showing the unknowledgeable, yeah.
Et juste un dernier mot, pour reprendre aussi les mots de Frédéric, c'est que oui, la science essaye de comprendre, mais elle modélise aussi, c'est-à-dire qu'elle se convainc d'une certaine perception du monde en normalisant arbitrairement une vision du monde, et dans lequel on est rentré, et dans lequel on soumet tout le reste du vivant, en fait. Et on n'a que cette petite... voilà, ce trou pour percevoir la complexité.
Yeah, so we perceive complexity in the end through a very reduced lens, because we have to come up with models. So I think this is very interesting also to me in machine learning, which all rests on models. If you think about these autoencoder we're describing in our project, it's a model of the world, you know. That's what a artificial neural network is. It's trying to make some kind of a representation of the world based on what it perceives. It's extremely limited, of course. Yeah. I want to add something about cybernetics, because Sarah brought it up, and I think it's definitely related to a discussion. This will bring us back also to Pascal. you were talking about these concepts of control, and in cybernetics there's actually these two concepts of control and command, which are associated historically with these two brands of cybernetics. And Andrew Pickering wrote a book about that. So Andrew Pickering is a historian of science. He wrote this really great book called The Cybernetics Brain a few years ago, and in this book he explains that when cybernetics actually had kind of two schools, if one, it's not exactly explained like that, but he shows how the cyberneticians who were more living in America had kind of a different take on cybernetics than the ones who were living in the UK. So the Americans were a bit more like from the side of, and I'll simplify things a lot just to make it more intelligible. But the one camp was a bit more on the side of the command, which is how can we use systems to control things, to shoot missiles. And, you know, cybernetics came from this idea of shooting missiles in the Second World War. Like Norbert Wiener, the concept of cybernetics, which means governing, comes from trying to, Norbert Wiener was working in the war in the UK, trying to find in the ballistics, you know, how can you basically, how can you shoot these very fast German planes that you know, are just too fast. So when you shoot at them, they're not there. So you need to adjust. You need to find a way to automatically adjust your. So that, you know, the where you shoot those objects, and this is kind of like what actually inspired the Norbert Wiener's theory of communication. Originally. So this idea, and I mean, I think one big representative is Shannon theory of information. So this was really like, how can we constrain, make things as simple as possible to control these systems so that they can make something useful for us. But the other side, on the other side, you have these people like Gray Walter, who made these weird turtles, robotic turtles that were just moving around. And Gordon Pask, who made all these experiments and developed these really strange technologies and even made artworks. And so those are two very different approaches to understanding. And one of these approaches, the approach of Gordon Pask, was to say, okay, well, let's not try to control things. Let's just see if we can, with artificial systems, create things that are a bit lifelike, and so it's much more experimental and much more open-ended, I think. And I don't know. I think for me, maybe, and I don't know about Edwige and Fred, but for me, what I've been trying to do with Zinolali and many other art works that I'm working on is to try to bring this idea that technology maybe doesn't need to be under full control, and on the other side, that perhaps we need to embrace the idea that we can make technologies that are not completely under control.
I think that je peux rebondir sur ce que tu as dit, Sophia. Oui, et d'autant plus que aujourd'hui, si on en croit certains, en tout cas certains intellectuels français, le récit du progrès qui a emmené toutes ces technologies à prendre autant de pouvoir ne suffit plus, parce qu'on s'aperçoit très bien que les technologies, effectivement, en fait, n'améliorent pas nécessairement le sort de l'humain. Et aujourd'hui, on recherche quelque part un récit fondateur, un mythe fondateur dans lequel qui sont structurants des sociétés humaines et qui convergerait justement entre la problématique écologique et du vivant et les technologies. Et c'est vrai que le projet qu'on a commencé à élaborer sur Gordon Pask rentrerait vraiment là-dedans, comment créer des technologies non plus issues de la pensée humaine ni de cette volonté de contrôle et de domination, mais plutôt partant du du vivant, quoi.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, so imagining technologies that don't start from a perspective of domination, but start from a perspective of start from the living instead.
Fantastic. So that raises the excellent question of like how can we think about technology in life without this idea of progress, right? As you say, I do have more questions, but I think it's more than time to open questions to the audience. I've got to mention that Chris Salter has a really good question. Unfortunately, I don't have access to that chat just yet.
Maybe I can see.
So hopefully, Sofiane, you can help me out.
Okay, yeah. So I can read the question, or do you want me? I can post it here and give me a second. I'll post it here in the chat or private chat, which is actually not private apparently. Here.
Okay.
So I'll let you read it, Sarah, if you want.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Sofiane. So Chris Salter asks, I'm interested in the comment of the assemblage as a single sensoria. Doesn't this actually eliminate notions of difference? For example, that the autoencoder depends on an external sensor, the camera, to understand anything, or that different observers have different understandings of patterns. Some will see nothing, while others will fantasize things that are actually not there, like a monstrous Rorschach test. Sorry. So isn't this more like an assemblage of different sensoria, which all have...
Wait, which all have different reference points or motives. Yeah. So we have Tez has just joined us, by the way. So
hi all.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi there.
Sorry, I was late. I just saw the message a bit too late to join earlier, but here I am. Nice to see you.
Si j'ai bien compris, Sofiane, la question est une remarque sur le fait qu'on est incapable de construire, en fait, que nos technologies ont éliminé toutes les différences et n'intègrent que certaines formes de patterns à l'intérieur des outils.
Mm-hmm.
C'est ça?
Yeah, it's true that it's. I think that, and it's maybe one of the limitations, I would say, of our work with Tez, and we've been thinking about ways to actually move beyond that with purely systems that would be purely that would not have any kind of even let's say digital technology. So there would be. So it's true that in the Xenolalia case there is a digitization process that is happening in between these things. But so I think first to respond to that, to me, I think, you know, it's, and this is maybe a bold assertion, so it's more like an intuition, but I think that even though we've been luckily, I think, past this whole idea of computationalism, I think we're finally sort of moving past that idea that cognition is computation. I think computation is very limited as a model of cognition. But at the same time, I also think that computation, you know, symbol manipulation is also maybe part of, it's also part of cognition. I don't think that it's, and I think it's part of, in a way, it's part of nature. I mean, the human bodies and a lot of systems. I mean, you can think about viruses, you know, for example, you know, work with symbol manipulations. This is also making things intelligible, even if it's not perfect. It is something that is has a number of advantages. You know, the reason why we can communicate today is because we know how to use symbols. You know, and so the fact that we have as part of assemblage, some kind of a transition, some kind of a digitization, to me is not so much of a problem, because I think that, for example, if you look at the neural networks, for example, they're very, very different from sort of traditional rule-based systems. They're approximations of, you know, analog systems, but I felt, and that was kind of the idea with, for me at least, with this project. Maybe Tez can you know, can complete that. But for me, one of my interests with this project Xenolale was to explore what happens when we take digital systems and analog systems together, and to see if what we get is what kind of weird hybrid we get in this case, and what it can suggest. And then, I mean, concerning the understanding of pattern, yeah, I guess that this is more, to me, this is still more of a question than anything else. We've had a lot of reflections around that, what that meant with Tez. We were talking about some point, we're playing with this idea of the oracle, the idea that maybe this is something that can reveal some kind of information about the world, but that in the end is left to interpretation. And yeah, of course, people will project their own ideas on these things. They are presented as being symbols, so not so much like images. So they could also just be interpreted as some, like, I mean, symbols have no, not necessarily, if you see a letter, it doesn't necessarily have a meaning, like a Rorschach text, you know, like you would see an elephant or a butterfly, or, but if you look at just a letter if I look at the Chinese glyph, I don't necessarily see anything, but I think the sequence of these symbols can maybe evoke the idea that there is something, some kind of cognition going on. So anyway, I'll let, I don't have a specific answer, I guess, to that question, but maybe others can complete or bounce on that.
For sure.
What do you think, Tez?
No, I think I mean, you're quite right on most of your observation, and there are so many layers one can you know, look at this experiment from, and it's I think it's hard to give a single definition of what this project is really looking at, and what actually we want to show through this project. But the idea that we have not only a correlation between a digital system, and you say the analog system, but this is a biological system, so it's even kind of more complex, if you want, and even more analogic than whatever we think analogic is. So the question for us, I think, was really about, you know, what can emerge in the relationship between an artificial system and the biological system when set in a kind of simple environment like the one we are building. I mean, it's not that simple, but still, like, it's not. It doesn't want to you know, to be too complex. We started looking, for example, at the beginning at other ways to detect information from the microorganisms, for example, some biochemical analysis. I mean, it's still a mediation like the camera. So there's still something that mediates, some instruments that mediates the information that we get, and we use that information in a feedback loop with the artificial neural network and so forth. But at the end, I mean, we tried to simplify the process. I mean, the camera was the easiest way to get information to the autoencoder, but it could be any kind of information, in fact, as long as you kind of put it in a kind of matrix and feed the algorithm. So in that sense, again, we're not especially looking at what kind of mediation we're implementing, but more what can emerge out of this. And we also used, I think, also the simplest form of pattern, of visual pattern, that is the glyphs. I mean, and it's a kind of a really classic image for neural networks from the NIST database. At the same time, we're kind of modifying this. So we're getting the kind of the basic models for the glyphs from this database, but at the same time, we are creating new glyphs. And the creation of these new glyphs is something that actually emerges from this relationship. So the patterns that maybe every one of us could see or recognize in these glyphs or in the sequences of glyphs, it's really a kind of individual and personal thing, I believe. So we won't speculate on that, and we won't speculate on the idea that this is really a new language. I mean, this is really something that is new. It's a novelty that comes out of this process, and it's up to us to meditate on this. I would say we can look at the glyphs. We can look at the actual whole process of how the glyphs comes into life as an animation, because it's in a cycle that converges to a final one. But you know what that means, I think it's an open question, and I think that's the most important thing, that this stays an open question and not like a statement. That's what I think.
Fantastic. Would anybody else like to add something to this, or perhaps we can go to the next question? There are many very interesting ones in the chat.
That's okay. Go on. Yeah.
For sure. And so the next question is from Cecilia, and so hello, greetings from Peru. Greetings. Is it done by the human being or by Western culture? That's the question. And because in indigenous conceptions, there is a respect for nature and a sense of integration, which perhaps does not fully encompass it, but it does respect it. That's a very, very good question. I'm very curious to hear what each of you has would like to say about it.
We can't hear you.
Oh, no?
No, you can. It's just that Fred was trying to talk, and we couldn't hear.
Yeah. No, I was just trying to translate what I understood of the question.
So the question, I guess I could also try to like rephrase it and translate it at the same time. So the question pertained to, you know, the way most like the presentations are done, like the frameworks, the cybernetic framework itself, for instance. This is very Western construct. And what the question said was, well, in indigenous culture, there is a very different mode of relation with nature. You know, it respects it, and it doesn't encompass it completely. It has this like respect, maybe for what you're mentioning about like unknowability. Et donc la question, ça serait donc compte tenu du contexte très occidental des concepts avec lesquels on travaille, et même du cadre expérimental avec lequel on travaille, parce que la science occidentale aussi, hein, c'est, you know, this idea of the laboratory being this like super aseptic place where, you know, living beings go to like get killed, essentially. I mean, this is how most people are going to, most scientists or biologists are going to study the living. Of course, I'm like, je généralise, I'm generalizing across the board on this. And this idea that indigenous cultures, donc les cultures autochtones, les traditions autochtones, les modes de savoir et autochtones, comment nous aiderait-il à changer en fait notre perspective you know.
Yes, I agree with you that our science is a Western science. Okay? I'm a scientist, and I work on artificial intelligence. I try to apply artificial intelligence to plant biology, and I know that all my working community is based on Western concepts and so on. So I fully agree with you about that. What I can say is that on this project, Qui parle donc, with Edwige, and on this paper with Sofiane and so on, one of the main topics was the plant capacity to communicate with sound, sound waves and so on. And I must admit that if I started to work on that subject a few years ago, it's because I read a lot of stories, not very scientific papers, but yes, journal stories or things like that, from China, from eastern region of the world, from South America, about the possibility of communication between plants and humans, sometimes based on sound and sound waves. And so there are still, yes, what I want to say is that there are some scientists, and I think I am one of them. I try to be one of them. There exist some scientists that accept the fact that science is a Western science, is a Western institution, but that there exists also knowledge about reality in other cultures, and that it is interesting to go outside our Western communities. Yes, to try to discover, to understand, to explore the world. So I think I'm quite clean about that. Yeah.
Et moi, je veux juste pour pas dire la même chose en fait. Je suis pas sûre. Moi, je lis beaucoup. On lit beaucoup de l'ethnographie venant des Amérindiens. C'est très à la mode en fait aujourd'hui. Mais je suis pas sûre que ce soit la bonne voie pour se mettre à la place des autres êtres vivants et accepter ce qu'on appelle les hétéroperceptions. Et je pense que en plus, ça serait encore une preuve de recolonialisation, de réappropriation, de réaccaparation de la pensée non occidentale. Et on a déjà tout, en fait, en Occident pour transformer une mentalité de colon et de dominateur, puisque les grottes, quand même, qu'elles soient à Chauvet ou à Lascaux, montrent qu'il y avait d'autres mythologies qui ont structuré les peuples, et notamment un fort animisme. On le voit dans les grottes Chauvet ou Lascaux, qui sont les plus grandes grottes aujourd'hui en France, en tout cas, où l'être humain était beaucoup plus lié à l'animalité, moins c'est la végétation, mais ça on ne sait pas. Et donc ce rapport-là à l'environnement a existé en Europe. Et un mythe, et pour travailler en plus avec la directrice de Chauvet, un mythe ne disparaît jamais, il fait que évoluer. Donc comment en fait il nous est possible de réactualiser ces mythologies-là anciennes, archaïques? Désolée.
So yeah, I'll try to do my best to translate, but I guess the core of what you're saying, what Isri just said, was that she thinks that the West also have to, instead of doing like what we usually do, which is to steal from other culture, that of course we can definitely, this is very inspiring and very interesting to look at, consider other forms of other cultural views, other systems of knowledge. But she also said that the West needs to make its own homeworks in this, let's say, and and look at its own culture, and the West has in its culture all like these conceptions. They're already present, but maybe they've been forgotten. But she mentioned, for example, if you look at prehistoric paintings in France, she mentioned the Grotte de Chauvet, the Chauvet caves. You see that there's this the West, I guess, used to think about nature with this more integrative and respectful view than what we have today, and we need to perhaps reflect back on that to change our modes of doing and making knowledge seeking and technology development. So I will maybe also add to this. I think it's very important to understand that these processes that we've named of like command and control they cannot be separated from this culture of domination and colonialism that the Western culture and Western science has been historically a part of. And I mean, I think, to me, for example, if you look at the way that if you look at the original concept of the system from the cyberneticians, which is to me very open-ended, and if you look at what we've done with it, if you look at deep learning, AI, when we say AI, sometimes we get confused because it can mean different things. But right, let's say nowadays AI is mostly data-driven. It's mostly driven by actually a mode of industrialization and control over information that has. And if you look at the way that these systems are built, they're built on these components of these systems. I mean, if you take one neuron in a deep neural network, if you take one neuron, this is a sort of, actually it's a very simple open-ended system, but in a deep learning system, it's not open-ended anymore. It's been harnessed to do a specific job, and it's kind of like, so to me, it's not in a way like these deep learning networks that are trained to, I don't know if I could go as far as this, but let's say I think it's not very respectful of these neurons, because they're being fed with this data to process in order to do one very specific task, which is to, I don't know, recognize faces, and then it's used 90% of the time for, it's used for control. It's used, I mean, if you look at the top industries that are using neural nets, what is their business? Google, Facebook, their business is advertisement. That's what they do. They sell power. They generate power over people and nature, and they sell that power. That's what they do. That's their business model, and so it is a dominate. It is a domination. Once again, it's a process of domination, and one of my hopes with the kind of projects that we do is to try to disentangle that and to propose something else, to open up and say, you know, like there's other things we can do with these systems. There's other ways we can look at them. There's other, you know, yeah, there's just alternative. There's an alternative to that model of domination and colonialization.
Perfect. Would anybody have something else to say to jump back in? We can jump back to Chris Salter's question and then get back to this one, perhaps, or keep on going in this kind of theme. There's I think maybe we could also, as we do have time left, try and do some make some distinctions, some perhaps useful ones. We're discussing so many things at the same time, right? And Cecilia brought in a comment that was very interesting, and what she was saying was, I wasn't opposing technology or science in any way. It's just, you know, what I think she might have told us about was, you know, how about these other approaches, which is something that, you know, you've detailed some very thoughtful answers on, and you know, it seems to be, you know, about respecting those traditions as well, and sort of not contributing to further assimilating or integrating them in the settler sort of traditionalist culture. Like that's clearly a danger right there. This is something that, you know, we don't want to do. We don't want to perform what we're criticizing in this sense. Because that would be lacking respect, actually, for those cultures. But perhaps there would be some sense in like making collaborations across the board and identifying like very, very different entities that we're playing with. Because I mean, for example, Edwidge and Fred, you know, you're all playing with like simultaneously very abstract agents, like very abstract entities. Code, algorithms, everything stemming from like different traditions and different authors, machine learning, AI, deep learning, neural networks. I mean, there's this like, whoa, that's so huge, right? And you know, and even like within those works, like some do speak to each other more or less well, some others like don't, and are actually in conflict with each other. And there exists like multiple strands of cybernetics, as Sofiane said earlier. And so these very different types of entities that are abstract also, like, they also inhabit our world, and we also like work with them, and we work with a lot of different organisms like bacteria, viruses, you know, it's like everything that's flowing in the air. No matter how much we would like to work in an aseptic environment in the laboratory, they're still gonna, like, you know, those things are still gonna be in there despite all of our efforts to have this like clear, like, you know, perfect environment where we can see things unfolding. And so I think that ultimately goes back to what Chris was saying is, and asking about like, you know, we feel limited, we are limited by our sensorium, in terms of, you know, at the very, very conscious level, like at least, like in that sense of limitation. And it seems like all of your methods and experiments and all of your work just try to get beyond that kind of thing and sort of see like where, you know, where is the multiplicity? Like how can we account for like those like very different entities, traditions that we have, that we sort of work with. I'm hoping this sort of makes sense as a question. I can go back to. I'm sorry, I'm just gonna go back to the chat. Got too many windows open, too many tabs. I don't know about you guys. So yeah, this idea that we're playing with different entities, like, are there some that you find harder to work with than others? Like, did you cultivate like do some seem more approachable than others, or do they each have like different sorts of like challenges coming with them? Notably in that aspect of like the sensorium of like what our bodies are equipped with to sense their existence, to be able to relate and study and work with them, right? And what has been your experience so far in that like heterogeneity of everything that you work with? All right, I could perhaps ask.
Yeah, well, I was trying to maybe let other people respond, but I can very briefly, I can say something to it. You know, I mean, for me, this project was the first time I ever worked with microorganisms. And I would say that, and I think Tess will agree with that, that it was like, I mean, the neural net question took like a week to solve. Keeping the Uglinas alive after 3 years of working is still a challenge. For example, a big thing that we did was really finding the right kind of food and conditions to give them to keep them alive. Like just keeping them alive was already a big problem. And then I mean, like, yeah, this is an open-ended system, but you know, there is still, yeah, there is a tension always between controlling and, you know, and autonomy, or trying to, you know, create an experimental setup that will, you know, always sort of produce a controllable result, because, you know, I mean, we are trying to make some kind of apparatus, some kind of device, and some kind of we're streamlining some kind of an experiment, and it needs to be super stable in a way, because we want to show it in art galleries, so it has to be, you know, completely under control, because we're kind of bringing a lab outside of a controlled environment. So this has been extremely hard to do, just to, you know, work with these completely out of control beings. And I think that's what makes them so interesting at the same time, but it's really a puzzle. Yeah. So that's my main take on it, is like, yeah, working with living systems for me, it's been hard, like quite an experience.
Well, I agree, of course. At the same time, maybe I can say this is also maybe I mean, my take on the comment from the Peruvian people about the respect. I mean, what you learn when you work also with these creatures, I mean, it's because it's living things. You learn some kind of respect. I mean, you learn that, you know, you're not dealing with an object or with something you can dispose that easily, or with a light heart. It's something that, you know, you need to care about. And slowly, I think in time, you develop some kind of deeper and emotional relationship also with these creatures, and I think you understand a lot of things in terms of what it means to respect nature, and to respect them in order to respect your own sensibility, you know, about your own being and your own being in nature. So in that sense, you know, working in this kind of domains definitely teaches you things about nature and respect. So this is, you know, also for the Peruvian thing. And yeah, also what I mean, it is hard, and I think we've been through the design of at least like 4 or 5 different types of bioreactors, of ways, you know, to automate the process of you know, keeping the microorganisms in the right temperature with the right lighting, because they're photosensitive, phototactic actually. So they do photosynthesis. So you need to give them also the right amount of light, and to make them responsive to what we wanted to do with them in using light. That's also been, you know, like months of trials, and still I think it's I mean, it's a kind of like we have it more under control now, but it will never be totally under control. So I don't think we'll never get to a stage where we're sure if we bring this this setup in a gallery, it will work like it works in our laboratory. So that's the interesting part of this whole thing. At least that's the most interesting part for myself, for sure. It's you know, the relationship with the living. That's what I can say.
Yes. In our case, for the scientific part of our exhibition, maybe the most difficult point was we wanted to avoid cheating with plants or with science, because what we wanted to do was to show the response of plants when they are stimulated by either sound or wind or things like that. But and we wanted to use electrophysiological response. So we had electrodes. We put electrodes in the plants, and we wanted to show people the response of the plants. And in my as a scientist, I try to do that in my lab, but it's not obvious at all to obtain what you want to obtain, because plants are, yes, living beings, and sometimes it's okay, sometimes not. We don't understand at all everything in their behavior, and so we had to accept that well, what we are going to show in the room, in the scientific room, will be something that will be honest with the plant and with the spectators and people, and so we have to accept that. We have to. It's not a show. It's not a
fantasy.
Yeah, it's not a fantasy. So it was quite difficult to conceive this experiment, this artistic experiment, to design it, knowing that it was not completely sure that it will be okay for people, and so on. Yes,
Après, on va aller juste vous montrer rapidement ce que ça donne en vrai, l'exposition. C'était de imaginer ce que pouvait ressentir une plante en essayant au maximum de considérer nos propres mécanismes de perception et de sensation et en s'imaginant jusqu'à quel point on pouvait penser à la différence, mais c'était presque quasi impossible en fait. Et on en a conclu ça, et voilà, qu'en fait on est tous enfermés dans nos systèmes perceptifs, hein, c'est la Welt, et que quelque part, oui, il y a une limite. Hein. C'est Bergson qui dit ça, arrêtons-nous devant l'inconnaissable, à un moment donné, on ne sortira pas de notre corps. Et je pense que ça, c'était compliqué, et effectivement, monter une expo qui tienne compte quand même des différences qu'on peut imaginer sans raconter un conte de fées.
So Edwige just said that one of the big intentions with the show was to allow people to imagine what it would be like to perceive like a plant, but they realized in the process that in a way it was kind of an impossible task because we are never able to get out of our own mode of perception. We can maybe imagine that we're perceiving like a plant, but it's us who are imagining this. You know, it's in a way it has nothing to do with what the plant really perceives. But she said, you know, so that's one of the big take that they had out of this work, doing this work. C'est ça, Edwige, tu dis, c'est une des choses importantes que vous avez réalisées en faisant ça, c'est qu'il y avait un peu une impossibilité de vraiment...
Il y a le réel, en fait. Voilà, on est confronté au fait que les signaux perçus par l'homme ne seront jamais les signaux du végétal, quoi. Les sensations de l'homme ne seront jamais celles du végétal. On n'est pas de la même matière, on n'est pas il n'y a pas la même mémoire, il n'y a pas le même temps, il n'y a pas le même corps.
Yeah, we perceive always through our own, but I mean, I think we're not even, you know, if you take it to the extreme, I mean, like, you know, we can even not really know what it feels like to be another human being, even. Like.
Parce que une des questions, tu vois, c'est que le végétal peut vivre très, 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 très longtemps. Il a un temps beaucoup plus long, et on va essayer de le montrer.
Yeah.
Et quand tu le touches, qu'est-ce qu'une sensation étirée sur un temps long?
Yeah, there's a temporal difference. That's one of the big things with difference between the plants and the vegetal and the animal modes of perceptions. That the vegetal is typically, at least, much more. The time scale is very much different. But I was about to say, because I think that the presentation will come to an end soon. So if you, I'd be interested in seeing some of your exhibitions since we have the chance to be there today. So I would say maybe you should do it now.
Yeah, we have about 10 minutes left.
Aïe, on fait vite. Vas-y, Fred.
Here is the scientific part with plants, electrodes, screens, and some fans for wind, for simulating wind. Il a vous soufflez là?
Ça n'a pas l'air de marcher.
Si, mais ça.
Si, ça déclenche le truc.
L'écran n'est pas.
Oui, mais je pense. Yes, I will have to change electrodes.
Can you describe a bit what is the experiment doing? What's the purpose of the experiment?
Yeah, so people can go up on the microphone, and then it starts some fans for simulating wind. And it starts also some different natural sounds. And on this, on a screen we've got the different, and on this one also we've got different electrical responses of the plants. Okay, so the idea is stimulating the plant with sound, with winds, and measuring the effect, the internal response of the plant with electrodes, and measuring different things on different screens. Here it is another typical experiment that we are doing in our laboratories, where we send some sound waves. Here the sound of water. Some sound waves to the roots of different plants. And we wanted to show here the kind of experiments where we try to show that the roots of the plants are oriented towards the source of sound.
Vas-y, tu traduis.
How long does this process take for the roots to follow the sound? Just
Normally it's several weeks. But here in the experiment we are just trying to show the kind of experiment, but we are not able to obtain the same results because too noisy. It's not a good experimental environment.
But plants follow you're telling me that the roots of plants follow the sound of water, right?
Normally,
proven
in laboratories, yes. But in laboratories, yes. Not here.
So interesting that the response completely changes depending on the physical space that they're in.
Yes.
Vous entendez un oiseau de Sibérie, là. En fait, là, ça va être compliqué, Fred. Explique, s'il te plaît.
Ah non, c'est toi qui explique et je traduis.
Non. En fait, il y a trois bacs qui disent trois choses différentes. Hein. Ici, on pose la question de qui observe qui? Est-ce qu'on ne fait pas que s'observer soi-même quand on observe le vivant? Et en fait, c'est un traquage d'œil bête et méchant. Je fais très, très rapidement. Là, la question est qu'est-ce que ressent le végétal à un point de vue microscopique, justement pour questionner cette échelle de perception, hein, cette échelle de sensorialité. Donc c'est un robot microscope pour faire penser que le végétal n'a pas du tout la même sensorialité. Et là, on fait de la chronophotographie et on fait des photos toutes les 5 minutes pour en fait montrer que le végétal fait que bouger, mais vous ne le verrez pas. Et il y a 3 états. En fait, là, vous entendez l'état normal, où en fait, c'est un son grossi, que nous avons grossi. Et ensuite, il y a un autre état où tout est mis sous contrôle, justement pour regarder, pour critiquer cette perception dominante et mise sous surveillance des plantes et mesure. Voilà, on fait que mesurer et contrôler. Et ensuite, il y a toute une phase où tout se brouille pour expliquer que justement le réel, les mondes, dépend des organismes qui viennent épuiser chaque signification et que les sens pour nous n'ont aucun sens pour les autres espèces vivantes.
I think we're nearing we're nearing the end. It's 1:55. Maybe we have some time just for a few concluding remarks before the presentation gets closed. And before that happens, I really want to thank everybody for attending this session. These were immensely interesting, really great experiments and works to get to know about and to get to know about you. And thank you to the audience members. Please do keep in mind if there's so much that we barely got to really touch on that went on in the chat. And so if you have any other questions or perhaps suggestions, or please don't hesitate to get in touch with the presenters. The app that we have sort of facilitates this on an unprecedented scale. So yeah, I will leave the last words to each of you. Thank you.
Sofiane, do you want to add something for concluding?
Maybe, I mean, looking back at what you were just talking about, it just made me self-reflect on the work. So maybe that's kind of my own take-home message for today that I can share is the idea that these modes of perception, the human and non-human modes of perceptions, I feel like we're always, and this relates to a question that was asked earlier by Chris about our project. You know, like these symbols, for example, that are generated. What do they really mean? Maybe they mean just something from a human perspective, but maybe we're all just imagining that we have a relationship with these systems, and actually, you know, I don't know if the Uglina. I know I care about the Uglinas and the neural nets, but I don't know if they care about me. Anyway, just to say that. I think there's no resolution in a way to that. It's possible we're all living in a kind of a fairy tale that we're thinking that we know anything about these systems and these living beings, and it's all kind of in our mind that we have any kind of relationship with them, or that we can even try to understand them. Or maybe it means something because we are, in the end, even if we're imperfectly trying to have a relationship with them or understand them, well, in the end, we're also all part of a system together, you know, and we're not so different from these plants and from these microorganisms. We're, like I said earlier, we're part of the same soup, you know, and so anyway, that's kind of like, it's not fully formed thought, but that's what looking at your work just made me think.
Fred and Edwidge, maybe a few last words.
Okay, yeah, thanks. Yes, maybe something about what you said, Sophia, about cybernetics and artificial intelligence today, and I completely agree with you with the fact that today it seems that AI is completely oriented towards one of the two aspects of dimensions of cybernetics. You mentioned the one who want to control, to masterize, to yes. And maybe the other dimension that was about to try to discover different realities, or to analyze the possibility of emergence of phenomena. Maybe it's no more in AI that we want to look for that, and I don't know where, in complex systems, maybe the community about complex systems, mixing, maybe mixing computer science, but also analogical signals, and so yeah, maybe it's not only on AI, on artificial intelligence, and it's a pity for me, but yeah.
All right.
Juste pour finir, enfin pour compléter Fred, si l'humanité a pris cette voie de la rationalité, de la logique hyper formelle, c'est pas la seule et on le sait, et c'est vrai que c'est encourageant de se dire qu'il y a d'autres logiques qui sont pas celles de l'humanité, et qu'un jour peut-être on peut espérer une convergence, ou en tout cas d'autres manières de penser, et la pensée et le vivre.
Other logics are possible. That's a wonderful way to end our panel discussion. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye.